The Lost Child's Lullaby, the first echo. I first heard the lullaby on a stormy evening, when thunder rattled my windows and rain lashed the rooftops. I remember it was nearly midnight, and I was alone in my small apartment, flipping through old records. My grandmother had just passed away, leaving me a trunk filled with letters, photographs, and peculiar items from her youth. Nestled among the letters was a faded newspaper clipping that mentioned an abandoned orphanage in our town, the same orphanage where she'd briefly worked as a volunteer. The headline read, "The Lost Child's Lullaby Haunts Blackwood Orphanage." Intrigued, I read on. Eyewitness accounts claimed that, on stormy nights, a child's voice could be heard singing a haunting lullaby that no one recognized. Many had tried to find the source of the melody, but all who followed the sound were never the same. Some even disappeared without a trace. Curiosity stirred within me, but a chill crawled up my spine as I thought I heard the faint sound of a child humming just outside my door. I froze, heart hammering. I could have sworn I was imagining it. Yet, it was unmistakable. A fragile, mournful tune drifting through the howling wind. I rushed to the window, my breath fogging the glass. There was nothing but the torrent of rain cascading down the dark street. No sign of a child. No sign of anyone. Then the lightning flashed, illuminating a silhouette in the distance. Someone small, standing at the far end of the street. Just as I blinked, the figure vanished. But the lullaby lingered on the wind. It was that exact moment I felt compelled, maybe possessed is a better word, to uncover the truth behind the orphanage, the lost child's voice, and that chilling lullaby no one had heard for decades, until now. A warning ignored. After that eerie encounter, I found myself unable to sleep. The newspaper clipping lay on my kitchen table, the print smudged with age. I made calls to friends who had grown up in town, asking if they knew anything about Blackwood Orphanage. Most had only heard rumors, a cursed place with a dark past. A few claimed it was nothing more than a local ghost story, designed to scare children into staying inside after dark. Undeterred, I packed a flashlight, a camera, and some basic supplies. I also took my grandmother's old keys. She'd worked at the orphanage long ago, and maybe one of them would still fit a lock on the premises. Before I left, a neighbor caught me by surprise in the hallway. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, seemed to sense my intentions. "You're not going to that place, are you?" she said, voice trembling. "Don't do it, child. That building has a curse on it, and many who enter never find their way out." Her words hung in the air like a funeral bell. Yet my resolve only grew. Something about the lullaby had burrowed into my mind, a haunting puzzle piece that wouldn't let me rest until solved. That evening, as another storm began to brew, I started my car and headed toward the outskirts of town, down a lonely road engulfed by looming trees. My headlights barely cut through the swirling fog. The orphanage awaited, silent and abandoned, like a hungry more ready to swallow me whole. Arrival at Blackwood Orphanage. I reached the gated entrance just as the sky unleashed a torrent of rain. The wrought iron gates stood partially ajar, their ornate patterns rusted and broken. Beyond them, a sprawling, Gothic-style building loomed, its windows dark and lifeless. A lightning flash revealed shattered glass, peeling paint, and vines snaking up the walls. Pushing open the gates, I felt an unsettling chill, as though the air itself had grown colder the moment I set foot on the orphanage grounds. The courtyard was littered with debris, fallen branches, dead leaves, and remnants of old toys scattered among the weeds. I nearly tripped over a ragged teddy bear with one glass eye missing. I could have turned back. Something deep within me screamed that I should. Yet I pressed forward. At the main doors, I discovered they were locked. That's when I remembered my grandmother's keys. Among the small cluster, I tried each until one slid effortlessly into the door's ancient lock. A strange mixture of relief and dread flooded through me as the door creaked open, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled of dust and decay. The hallway inside was dim, illuminated only by sporadic lightning flashes through cracked windows. My flashlight revealed broken floorboards, peeled wallpaper, and a battered old piano standing in a corner. I couldn't resist pressing one key. It produced a soft, discordant note that resonated through the empty corridors. Almost instantly, I heard a faint giggle, like a child's laughter, echo in response. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I called out, "Hello?" Only silence answered, but it was enough to remind me that I was not alone. Whispering hallways. Stepping deeper into the corridor, I directed my flashlight along the walls. They were lined with faded photographs of children, smiling faces forever frozen in time. Plaques beneath them bore names that were barely legible. I could feel an unsettling presence, as if those children's eyes were following my every move. As I progressed, a hallway branched off to the left, leading to what looked like a common area. To the right, a flight of stairs spiraled upwards. Another low giggle reached my ears, this time from somewhere above. My pulse quickened. I stood at the base of the stairs, shining my flashlight up into the darkness. The steps were partially rotted, each one groaning under the weight of time and neglect. A sense of foreboding clawed at my chest, but the lullaby was stronger, beckoning me. Something about that melodic hum, faint yet persistent, drew me onward like a moth to a flame. Midway up the stairs, I paused. I could hear a soft whisper of a child's voice. It sounded as though someone was whispering my name, though I couldn't be certain. The storm outside raged, lightning illuminating the halls in abrupt flashes. Each time the light flickered, I caught sight of a small shape darting around corners. A fleeting silhouette that vanished as quickly as it appeared. By the time I reached the second floor, my hands were shaking. A rotting wooden sign read, "Dormitories." Doors lined both sides of the corridor. Some were open, others tightly shut, their doorknobs missing. My flashlight settled on one door at the far end. It was adorned with childish drawings of stars and moons. Beyond it, I swore I heard the lullaby begin anew, a melody that sounded both mournful and sweet, echoing down the corridor. The dormitory of shadows. I approached the decorated door cautiously, each step a heart-pounding endeavor. The drawings of stars and moons were faded, done in what looked like colored pencil. The doorknob resisted at first, rusted from years of disuse. With a firm push, it relented, revealing a small dormitory room lined with rows of bunk beds. The smell of mildew and damp wood was overpowering, but something else lingered beneath, a metallic tang that made me nauseous. The flashlight beam trembled over the empty beds, some with tattered sheets still clinging to the frames. The windows were boarded shut, allowing only thin shafts of lightning to pierce through. Shadows danced across the walls in erratic patterns, like silent specters. In the center of the room stood a rocking chair. It was swaying on its own, as if recently vacated by an invisible occupant. My blood ran cold at the sight. The lullaby I'd been hearing was louder now, emanating from somewhere within this room. I felt a sudden drop in temperature, my breath turning to mist before me. I took another cautious step forward. A particularly bright flash of lightning lit up the space, and for one instant, I saw her. A young girl no older than 7, with braided hair and a nightgown that looked decades out of fashion. She stood near the far window, cradling a tattered doll in her arms. Her lips moved in sync with the lullaby. Then darkness reclaimed the room. When lightning struck again, she was gone, leaving only the rocking chair swaying in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. My heart hammered as I realized the lullaby hadn't vanished. It continued, echoing from the corridor once more, beckoning me deeper into the orphanage's secrets. Hidden ward records. Desperate for answers, I left the dormitory and ventured into an administrative office I noticed at the end of another corridor. The door was off its hinges, the brass plaque reading records and administration. Shelves filled with rotting ledgers lined the walls, and a massive wooden desk dominated the center. Most of the documents were gnawed by rodents or ruined by mold. Rifling through the drawers, I stumbled upon a small journal bound in cracked leather. Inside, dated entries detailed the orphanage's daily operations, meal distributions, staff schedules, medical checkups. Then I came across an entry marked with a red ink blot. Incident in the West Wing. My pulse quickened as I read. It mentioned a young girl named Celeste, who had gone missing during a thunderstorm. The staff searched the entire building but could only hear her voice echoing in the halls. For 3 nights, she sang the same lullaby, leading them on a frantic chase that ended in tragedy. The final words of that entry were etched in my mind. We never found her body. Her voice lingers in the orphanage still. A sudden gust from the hallway flipped the pages, revealing a final note scrawled in messy handwriting. She's trapped between worlds, reliving her final night. God help anyone who hears her song. A crash of thunder rattled the windows, and my flashlight flickered. My breath came in ragged gasps. Had I been foolish enough to follow her voice? Was I already entangled in the same haunting cycle? Gritting my teeth, I clutched the journal tight. If there was a way to end this, it had to be within these pages, or somewhere else in this cursed building. The West Wing's secret. The journal mentioned the West Wing as a key location for the incident. Despite the fact that half the orphanage was reportedly unsafe, with collapsed floors and caved-in ceilings, I felt an inexorable pull toward that area. The lullaby drifted around me like a persistent draft, no matter which hallway I took. The West Wing corridor was blocked by wooden beams and rubble, but I noticed a narrow space I could squeeze through. On the other side, darkness pressed in. My flashlight flickered across what seemed like a large recreation room. Chairs overturned, tables broken, shattered glass strewn everywhere. The air was thicker here, laced with a stale odor, and each footstep echoed ominously. Suddenly, lightning illuminated the room, revealing walls splattered with old, rust-colored stains. My stomach churned as I realized what they might be. Yet, pressing forward, I found a massive set of double doors at the far end. An inscription above them read, "Auditorium." I pushed against the doors. They groaned as they opened onto a deserted theater-like space. Rows of dusty wooden seats faced a stage shrouded in tattered curtains. The storm outside seemed to intensify, thunder roaring in the distance. And then it happened. Laughter, genuine and youthful, echoed across the auditorium. Shining my flashlight toward the stage, I caught a glimpse of movement. A shadowy figure appeared between the curtains, small and childlike. The lullaby began again, louder now, as if performed on an unseen piano. My entire body went tense. What was I truly chasing here? A ghost, a memory, or something far more malevolent? A flicker of the past. I climbed onto the stage, my footsteps raising small clouds of dust. Beneath my flashlight's beam, I spotted a makeshift prop chest and discarded stage scripts scattered on the floor. The chest was partially open, revealing children's costumes. Tiny dresses, vests, and hats. They were moth-eaten and smelled of age-old neglect. Drawn by curiosity, I flipped through a pile of yellowed script pages. They mentioned a Founders Day performance. Written notes indicated Celeste was to perform a solo lullaby. My heart pounded as I realized it had to be the same lullaby now echoing through these halls, decades after her disappearance. An inexplicable chill swept the stage. I looked up to see flickering lights overhead. It was impossible, the building had no electricity. Yet, bulbs in the overhead fixtures glowed weakly, casting dancing shadows across the worn curtains. Suddenly, the stage lights brightened, revealing row after row of vacant seats in the auditorium. But they weren't empty anymore. In that fleeting moment, I saw ghostly silhouettes of children seated there, faces turned toward me in silent anticipation. In the front row stood Celeste, her hands clasped over her doll, her eyes fixed on mine. A crash of thunder, a blink, and they were gone, vanished as if they had never been there. I dropped the script, my legs nearly giving way. The storm outside raged on, and the lullaby drifted, faint yet unrelenting. Taking a deep breath, I realized I wasn't just experiencing echoes of the past. I was being drawn into it, piece by piece. The basement staircase. From the auditorium, a small door near the stage led to a narrow staircase spiraling downward. A sign above it read, "Basement Storage." The journal had mentioned a hidden room in the basement where staff sometimes locked away unruly children for punishment. The idea turned my stomach, but if Celeste was one of them, I needed to see where this dark secret led. The stairs were treacherous, each step threatening to give way under my weight. The smell of damp earth and mold thickened with each footfall. I reached the bottom, where a single corridor extended into the darkness, water dripping from the ceiling at irregular intervals. Thunder seemed muted down here, replaced by a claustrophobic silence that pressed in on me. But the lullaby persisted, echoing eerily off the stone walls. As I followed the sound, my flashlight revealed a series of iron-barred cells, makeshift holding rooms for children, each too small and utterly devoid of comfort. My heart ached at the realization of the orphanage's cruel past. Then I found a door at the very end, padlocked and scrawled with warnings in what appeared to be old chalk. "Keep out, danger, and she lives here." My hands trembled as I tried the padlock with my grandmother's keys. Finally, one turned, and the lock clicked open. Inside lay a small chamber with a single cot and a broken mirror. Tattered drawings littered the floor, crayon pictures of a night sky, a full moon, and a small child reaching up. If Celeste had been kept here, it was a place of nightmares. My flashlight caught a faint reflection in the mirror, my own pale face, contorted with fear. But I swear, standing behind me was another figure, a small child with vacant eyes. Then, in a flash, she was gone. The shattered reality. I stumbled out of that cursed room, my mind reeling. The presence in the mirror had shaken me to the core. My flashlight began to dim, its batteries struggling against the encroaching darkness. Each flicker felt like a countdown to my own doom. The corridor suddenly felt endless. My steps echoed too loudly, as though someone, or something, walked alongside me in perfect unison. A swirl of disorientation overcame me. For a moment, it seemed like the corridor was stretching, warping, leading me deeper into the earth. The lullaby changed. It grew sharper, more urgent, as if warning me rather than luring me. I tried to follow it back to the stairs, but every passageway I chose looped around, leading me to dead ends or collapsing floorboards. Panic set in. Was I trapped here forever, just like the rumors had claimed? Then, a bright flash of lightning filtered through a tiny window near the ceiling, illuminating a path I hadn't noticed before. I rushed toward it, heart pounding. The corridor opened into a storage area filled with broken furniture and cobwebs. Old crates bore the orphanage's insignia, covered in layers of dust. Just as I felt a glimmer of hope, the door behind me slammed shut on its own. My flashlight died completely, plunging me into darkness. My breath hitched, the only sound besides the relentless drip of water. From somewhere in the black void, Celeste's lullaby resumed, slow and mournful. It seemed to come from every direction, echoing off the walls, seizing my mind in a grip of terror. Unwanted company. My heart hammered in the darkness as I fumbled for spare batteries in my backpack. Lightning flared outside the small window, briefly illuminating the cramped space. In that fleeting glow, I saw a figure crouched in the corner, a child's outline hugging her knees. I dared to whisper, "Celeste." No response. Another flash and the figure was gone, replaced by a stack of crates. My imagination was playing tricks, or perhaps the orphanage's lingering spirits toyed with me. Shaking, I managed to replace the batteries. Weak but serviceable light once again cut through the darkness. I took a slow, steadying breath and inspected the storage area. Dust motes floated in the beam, swirling like disturbed ghosts. Broken chairs, moldy mattresses, and disused stage props cluttered the space. As I navigated around the debris, I heard scuttling, tiny footsteps or perhaps rats. But something felt off, more deliberate, as though multiple little feet ran around me in circles. My flashlight revealed no living creatures, just a labyrinth of forgotten junk. Then I heard a whisper so close, it felt like it brushed against my ear. "Stay with us." I spun, nearly dropping the flashlight. The words were faint, almost childlike. Fear spiked in my chest as a wave of claustrophobia hit. The lullaby no longer sounded sorrowful. It carried a yearning quality, an invitation. Part of me questioned if the orphan spirits were truly malevolent or simply desperate for company in their eternal solitude. Either way, I had to find my way out of this twisted labyrinth before I lost my mind to the darkness that consumed them all. The crumbling wall. Determined to escape the basement, I searched for an alternative exit. My flashlight revealed a section of the wall that looked compromised by water damage. The bricks were damp and covered in mold, and part of the mortar had crumbled away. If I could remove enough bricks, I might squeeze through and reach the outside. Using a rusted crowbar I found among the clutter, I pried at the bricks. Each one came loose with a wet, sickening squelch. The tunnel behind the wall emitted a putrid stench, like rotting leaves and something far worse. But I had no other choice. Returning to the locked basement door seemed futile, and I couldn't stay in this tomb forever. With one final effort, I cleared a hole large enough to slip through. Lightning flashed from somewhere up ahead, suggesting there was an opening to the outside. My spirits lifted momentarily. Perhaps I could finally leave this wretched orphanage behind. Crawling through the jagged gap, I found myself in a narrow passage that sloped upward. The ground was slick with mud and some unidentifiable slime. The smell was overpowering, forcing me to gag. Yet I pushed on. The lullaby still trailed behind me, unnervingly close, as though ghostly children followed in my footsteps. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw moonlight peeking through a rusty grate at the end of the passage. Relief washed over me. I hurried forward, ignoring the lumps of debris beneath my hands, refusing to look too closely. If this was an exit, I was going to take it. Outside, or so I thought. I pushed against the rusty grate, applying all my strength. The metal screeched in protest, and at last it gave way. Cold, rain-laden air hit my face as I emerged into the orphanage's overgrown courtyard. Relief flooded me like a tidal wave. I was outside. Thunder rolled overhead, and I realized the storm still raged. The moon peeked intermittently through racing clouds, casting fleeting silver rays across the courtyard. Weeds and wild thorns had overtaken the once manicured lawn, and a broken fountain stood at its center empty, except for stagnant rainwater. I scrambled to my feet, scanning for the main gates. There they were, not far off, slightly ajar, just as I'd found them. Heart pounding, I rushed across the courtyard, feeling the squelch of mud beneath my shoes. The lullaby had quieted to a low hum. Was it fading, or was I just too focused on escape to hear it clearly? When I reached the gates, I pushed them with trembling hands. They wouldn't budge. Shock gave way to frustration. They'd been open before. I tugged, slammed my shoulder against the iron bars, but they felt like they were welded shut. Panic flared in my chest. The wind whipped through the trees, leaves scattering around me. Just then, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A small figure stood near the fountain, half hidden in the shadows. A flash of lightning revealed Celeste, her doll clasped in one hand, looking at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it sadness or triumph? My breath caught as she began to sing, her frail voice carried by the wind. The lullaby was no longer distant. It rang loud and clear, echoing in every corner of the courtyard, binding me to this forsaken place. A twisted sanctuary. Shaken by the locked gates and Celeste's reappearance, I retreated to the decrepit fountain at the courtyard's center. It offered little shelter from the pounding rain, but at least it was some distance away from the orphanage's looming entrance. Lightning revealed strange carvings along the fountain's rim, children's names etched in uneven lettering. Many were faded beyond recognition, but a few remained legible. Thomas, Marie, and Celeste. I ran my fingers over Celeste's name, feeling the grooves in the stone. A pang of sorrow mixed with fear welled inside me. Why was this child's spirit trapped here, forced to wander these grounds, singing the lullaby that once brought her joy? Did she seek help or vengeance? I found myself whispering, "I'm sorry," as if apologizing for trespassing into her pain. Suddenly, the fountain water rippled violently. It began to overflow despite the lack of rainfall directly hitting it. My reflection shimmered on the surface, and as I stared, Celeste's face appeared beside mine. A grim specter instead of the innocent child I'd glimpsed before. Her eyes were hollow, her expression tormented. I scrambled backward, slipping in the mud and nearly falling over. The lullaby swelled again, echoing off the courtyard walls, enveloping me in layers of fear and sadness. Lightning flashed, and for an instant, the fountain was crowded with ghostly forms, childlike silhouettes, arm in arm, gazing skyward. Then darkness returned, leaving me breathless and alone in the storm. A deal with the shadows. With no escape through the gates, I realized I had to confront whatever force held me captive. I recalled the journal's mention of Celeste being trapped between worlds. Maybe there was a ritual or a hidden record that could set her spirit free, breaking the cycle. Returning inside felt like stepping into the jaws of a beast. Nonetheless, I forced the orphanage's door open again. The corridors seemed even more twisted. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing deep gouges in the plaster. The air itself felt charged, as if the entire building was alive and watching me. I made my way back to the administrative office, hoping the journal might hold more secrets. Rifling through old records, I found a single sheet of paper tucked inside a file labeled Confidential. Celeste. It detailed an unorthodox ritual the staff had attempted. Something about closing the gap between the living and the dead. They believed Celeste's spirit haunted the halls, and they tried to banish her. The notes claimed it failed miserably, resulting in deadly consequences. A sense of dread coiled around me as I read the final line. Only by singing her lullaby in completion might her spirit find rest, or else the cycle continues. Before I could glean more, a door slammed in the corridor. Footsteps, small, erratic, pattered toward the office. My heart seized. The lullaby began again, faint at first, then rising like a slow tide. I clutched the page, adrenaline surging. If I was going to break this curse, I had to learn that song and finish it. But the question remained. Was Celeste truly longing for release? Or was I simply delivering myself into her clutches? The melody unveiled. Time felt distorted as I roamed the corridors in search of anything resembling sheet music or a lyric sheet for Celeste's lullaby. The building groaned around me. Floorboards creaked, windows rattled in the wind, and whispers danced along the walls. The deeper I went, the more I sensed the orphanage bending to a supernatural rhythm, guiding me to where it wanted me to be. Finally, I found a small music room adjacent to the main corridor. Inside, a single upright piano stood, its varnish cracked and its keys yellowed with age. By sheer candlelight from a flickering stub on the windowsill, I noticed a folder on the piano stand, labeled Celeste Solo. Hands trembling, I opened the folder to reveal a tattered piece of sheet music. The notes were faint, and portions were smudged, but enough remained to piece together the lullaby's melody. Scrawled lyrics in a child's uneven handwriting read, "Hush now, hush, the night is long, drift away to a peaceful song." It continued for several lines, each word tinged with innocent longing. Yet, I sensed an undercurrent of dread woven into the very notes. I sat on the piano bench, uncertain. My fingers brushed the keys, attempting the opening chords. Lightning flared outside, illuminating Celeste's silhouette in the doorway. She stood there, doll in hand, listening intently. As I played, the lullaby echoed in the corridor, her soft voice humming along in perfect harmony. I felt a surge of hope. This could be the way to release her. But as I continued, the atmosphere grew thick with an oppressive energy. The shadows around Celeste darkened, shifting like living entities. The final lines of the lullaby beckoned, waiting to be played. A haunting duet. My hands shook as I tried to follow the damaged sheet music. The lullaby's notes filled the air, blending with Celeste's ethereal humming. Each chord seemed to vibrate through the orphanage, stirring up the lingering spirits. Doors rattled in distant corridors, and I heard glass shattering somewhere upstairs. It was as if the entire building was resonating with the lullaby's power. Celeste stepped closer. Raindrops clung to her nightgown, although she showed no sign of actually being wet. Her eyes were locked on the piano keys, her lips still moving in time with the melody. My pulse thundered, but I forced myself to continue. As I approached the final stanza, smudged but decipherable. The piano's notes turned dissonant, almost as if resisting my touch. A wave of vertigo swept over me. The room blurred, replaced momentarily by a vision of the past. Children assembled around the piano, singing along with Celeste. The orphanage was bright, lively. No broken windows, no peeling paint. And then, in a jarring snap, the vision vanished, replaced by the present decay. I realized Celeste was standing right beside me now, looking at the sheet music. She whispered something, but the storm's roar drowned out her words. Gathering my courage, I struck the final chord. The lullaby ended with a haunting minor key, echoing off the peeling walls. For a moment, silence reigned. Then a gust of wind rushed through the music room, extinguishing the candle and plunging us into darkness once more. Celeste let out a low, anguished sob. My heart hammered. Had I done something wrong? Or had I just sparked the final act of this harrowing ordeal? The orphanage unleashed. In the absolute darkness, I could feel Celeste's presence slip away. My flashlight flickered back to life, revealing the music room in a state of disarray. The piano lid was slammed shut, and the windows were cracked, though I'd never heard them break. The entire building felt as though it was in motion. Wooden beams groaned, footsteps raced through the halls, and distant screams echoed like a tragic chorus. I stepped into the corridor and gasped at the sight. The walls warped, as if shifting between two realities. One moment, the orphanage looked restored, with children running and laughing. The next, it was the same decrepit ruin I had entered, haunted by shadows. It was as if the veil between past and present was tearing. Lightning flickered, illuminating a distant figure. At first, I thought it was Celeste again, but this figure was taller, an adult, perhaps a staff member from decades ago. They vanished into a doorway, and I felt compelled to follow. The corridor stretched impossibly long, each step echoing into infinity. I reached the doorway to find a large office, different from the administrative one I'd seen earlier. A plaque on the desk read, "Headmistress Ainsworth." Papers were scattered everywhere, detailing orphans' daily routines, punishments, and possible adoptions. The name Celeste appeared multiple times. The headmistress had been desperate to hide the child's disappearance from benefactors. Suddenly, the figure reappeared behind the desk. Her face was obscured in shadow, but a single lightning flash revealed hollow eyes and a skeletal grin. She whispered in a rasp, "She's ours." Then she melted into the darkness. My skin crawled as the realization sank in. The orphanage wouldn't let Celeste go without a fight, and it certainly wouldn't let me go either. The final confrontation. The building's corridors led me in a dizzying loop, as though every path circled back to the main foyer. Outside, the storm reached a fever pitch, rain hammering on the roof like an army of drums. The lullaby had returned, but in a fractured, dissonant form. Snatches of melody swirling in the air, impossible to ignore. In the foyer, flickering lightning revealed Celeste's small figure at the top of the grand staircase. She clutched her doll, eyes fixed on me. Slowly, I ascended the steps, each creak amplified by the unnatural silence that blanketed the orphanage. When I reached her, she looked up with tear-filled eyes. I understood then. She was trapped, forced to relive her final night, forever calling out for help. The staff's failed ritual, the cruel punishments, the fear and loneliness. It all culminated in her restless spirit. I knelt, extending my hand. "Show me," I whispered. Celeste placed her tiny, cold hand in mine. In a rush of images, I saw the thunderstorm that raged decades ago. The staff searching frantically for her after a misunderstanding led to her confinement. I felt her terror as she tried to sing, believing her lullaby would guide them to her. But no one came in time. Tears stung my eyes. When I blinked, the vision dissipated, and I was once more in the dilapidated foyer. Celeste tugged my hand, leading me toward the orphanage doors. Could this be the final release for both of us? A lingering song. Hand in hand, we approached the orphanage's massive doors. Rain pelted the outside world, and lightning flared continuously like a camera's strobe. Celeste looked back at me, her eyes pleading for an end to this nightmare. I reached for the door, fully expecting it to be locked as before. But this time it swung open. Together we stepped onto the threshold. The storm winds whipped around us, and for a moment, I felt a deep peace as if the entire world had paused to witness this moment. Celeste smiled sadly, then began to sing the lullaby one final time. Her voice was clearer than ever, resonating with childlike purity. The courtyard lit up with a fierce flash, and in that instant, Celeste's form glowed, then dissolved into a swirl of silvery mist. The rain seemed to pass right through her, dispersing her essence into the night sky. A wave of profound sorrow and relief washed over me, as though I'd helped her escape a prison she'd known for far too long. I called out her name, but only the echo of thunder replied. The lullaby faded into the wind, leaving the orphanage silent. I blinked away tears, realizing the gates were open now, swinging lazily in the storm's gale. Stepping forward, I felt the mud beneath my feet. Freedom was at hand. Even as I ran to my car, I felt a part of me remained in that orphanage, bound to the events of the night. The storm began to wane, and I looked back at the looming silhouette of Blackwood Orphanage. Though Celeste was gone, I could still hear faint traces of her lullaby in the wind. As I drove away, I knew the memory of her voice, and the time I spent trapped in the building's eerie past would haunt me forever.